Have you ever felt backed into a corner simply because your voice wasn't loud enough? Today's story is about a man who stood alone to defend his land, facing off against a system that seemed impossible to shake. If you've ever felt powerless, if you've ever been treated unfairly, please like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support stories like this, where justice still has a place, thanks to ordinary people who refuse to back down. In a quiet, rural corner of western Oklahoma, where open fields stretch all the way to the horizon and high-voltage power lines rise like steel nails hammered into the sky, there lived a man named Lucas Bennett on a piece of land passed down from his grandfather. The land was vast, flat, and windswept, where Lucas had spent most of his life tending crops, mending wooden fences, and living a quiet, uncomplicated life. Lucas was never one for conflict. With his worn-out cowboy hat and dust-covered boots, he embodied calm resilience. He lived alone, kept a few cows, grew hay, and spent his afternoons sitting on the front porch, watching the sunlight slide across the towering power lines that cut through the fields like massive veins of the earth. To Lucas, that land wasn't just property. It was family, heritage, and freedom. Not far from his farm, a new residential development had sprung up, known as Silver Creek Estates. Beautiful, modern, and strictly governed by a homeowners association, led by Karen, a blonde woman with razor-sharp eyes and a permanent stack of paperwork under her arm. Karen wasn't born there. She came from the city a few years back and quickly took it upon herself to bring order to everything. Under her direction, the HOA transformed what was once a simple rural community into a halfway suburbia, complete with house plaques, regulated fence colors, and even rules about lawn height. Lucas, while not part of the HOA, owned land that bordered Silver Creek. At first, he didn't care. As long as they left him and his cattle alone, he'd smile and wave at the passing neighbors without a second thought. But then something happened, something he didn't see coming. Karen and the HOA began expanding quietly, and the line between private property and community planning began to blur. And on an early summer morning, when Lucas discovered thick utility cables quietly running across his barley field with no notice or permission, he knew at that moment his peace had been severed. And this time, he wasn't going to sit back and let it continue. Lucas only wanted to live in peace on the land passed down by his ancestors. But what he discovered beneath the soil became the start of a confrontation no one saw coming. If you want to know how he responded and what made an entire community start seeing him in a whole new light, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next part, and share this story. Because for anyone who's ever felt pushed around, this is a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up. One crisp morning, Lucas woke up earlier than usual to check the southern fence, right where his land bordered the dirt road that led into the hayfield. As his pickup truck came to a stop, he stepped out and frowned. The soil had been disturbed. Strange tire tracks crisscrossed the damp earth, clear and fresh. There hadn't been any rain recently, certainly not enough to cause erosion, and Lucas knew every bump and blade of grass on this land. Something had happened overnight. He crouched down and noticed shiny black cables buried hastily, their ends still poking out of the dirt, as if someone had tried to hide them in a rush. Lucas wasn't an engineer, but he'd worked with electronic irrigation systems long enough to know these cables didn't belong to anything on his farm. He followed the line and, to his shock, discovered that the cables ran straight from Silver Creek Estates, cutting directly through his barley field, and vanished in the distance toward a utility substation. Shock, anger, disbelief. Those were the emotions swirling inside him as he stood in the middle of the field, staring at the looming shadows of the high-voltage towers overhead. These were no longer just foreign structures in the distance. They were now part of a silent invasion of his land. He had never signed a single consent form, no compensation, no warning, not even a courtesy call. His land, passed down for 3 generations, had been violated as if it didn't matter at all. That very afternoon, Lucas jumped into his truck and drove straight to the HOA office. Inside, Karen was reviewing documents with a man in a suit, likely the HOA's legal counsel. Lucas knocked on the door, composed on the outside, but with a storm in his eyes. "I just discovered your power lines running across my land," he said, his voice slow but icy. You dug trenches, laid cable, and didn't ask for permission. Karen raised an eyebrow, as if the matter barely warranted her attention. Lucas, this is a community lighting project approved by the HOA. It's for the benefit of everyone in the neighborhood. No one's being harmed. Lucas clenched his fists. I'm being harmed because that land belongs to me, and you had no right. Karen sighed, turning to her legal advisor. He's just another stubborn landowner. A couple of warning letters should shut him up. Lucas walked out without another word, but in his mind, a decision had been made. If they could sneak in under the cover of darkness, then he would respond in the clear light of day, with the sound of steel cutting through cable on a morning not far off. After the tense encounter with Karen and the HOA board, Lucas could no longer stay silent. The feeling of having his rights violated, of being dismissed, was boiling inside him. He wasn't someone who typically sought out conflict, but this time was different. This was his land, not Karen's, not the HOA's. And if they thought they could claim it without resistance, they had chosen the wrong man. Lucas decided not to go down the usual path of meetings and paperwork, the kind of bureaucratic back and forth Karen expected. He had no patience for empty promises and phony handshakes. Instead, he reached out to Eddie Malone, an old friend who had worked in the electrical industry. Eddie wasn't just a sharp electrical engineer, he was also the kind of guy who got excited at the prospect of an unusual challenge. As soon as Lucas explained the situation, Eddie agreed without hesitation. How do we cut through those power lines without causing a mess or starting a war? Lucas asked. Eddie grinned, his eyes lighting up like someone handed a kid a new toy. We'll need some serious tools and a solid plan. But trust me, once we're done, they won't dare install anything on your land again. The next day, Lucas and Eddie began plotting. They made a list of what they'd need: industrial-grade cable cutters, a rapid disassembly kit, and of course, a video camera to record everything. Lucas's goal wasn't just to stop the trespassing. It was also to build a bulletproof case in case things escalated legally. They planned to act early one morning, when the neighborhood would still be deep in sleep. The crew would wear high-visibility gear, posing as professional utility workers, giving them an extra layer of plausible cover to avoid suspicion. Even with the planning, Lucas couldn't shake a gnawing sense of unease. Operations like this could go sideways fast, and while he never wanted to get into a legal battle with the HOA, now it seemed inevitable. During preparation, Lucas kept everything absolutely secret. He didn't share the plan with a single soul in the area, not even his closest friends. The less anyone knew, the lower the risk of someone tipping off Karen. If all went smoothly, the HOA would be none the wiser, at least not until it was too late. They still believed his land was just another canvas for their community projects, but Lucas was ready to prove otherwise. The days leading up to the operation dragged by. Lucas spent each night checking, rechecking, fine-tuning every detail. The tension inside him built steadily, like a ticking clock, hour by hour, minute by minute. He knew that one small mistake could trigger a chain reaction, dragging him into a war he might not be able to walk away from. Lucas sat alone in his rustic wooden cabin the night before the operation. Spread out on the table was a detailed map of his property, next to a notebook where every time slot and step of the plan had been meticulously outlined. This wasn't a burst of anger anymore. This was deliberate, calculated. He didn't just want to eliminate the HOA's trespass. He wanted to send a clear message. His land was not a playground for self-righteous people hiding behind the phrase, "for the community." Eddie showed up early with two of his buddies, Marty, a residential electrician, and Vic, a former high-voltage line worker from Texas. They weren't legal warriors or courtroom tacticians, but they carried something the HOA didn't: real-world experience, technical know-how, and the pride of working-class grit. The four of them gathered in the back shed where Lucas had stashed the gear: a hydraulic cable cutter, insulated gloves, a GoPro, and hard hats fitted with headlamps. "We're not here to destroy anything," Lucas emphasized. "We're just removing what never belonged to them. The cleaner, the clearer, and the more lawful we are, the better." Eddie nodded. "And we're recording everything, step by step, no edits. So if the HOA tries to take this to court, they'll be the ones exposed." The operation was scheduled for 5 a.m. on Saturday, when the neighborhood would still be fast asleep. They would approach from the back field. the area least visible to HOA surveillance and furthest from any residential security cameras. In the dim light of dawn, the team would be dressed like professional utility workers, high-visibility vests, hard hats, safety goggles, and even a makeshift warning sign that read, "Electrical cable maintenance, do not approach." But Lucas wasn't just preparing for a technical job, he was preparing for a legal showdown. In his truck, he had a folder ready to go, including an official deed showing he owned the land, filed with the county. GPS-marked images showing the cables ran squarely through his property. A printed copy of the state law that clearly stated, no infrastructure can be installed on private land without written consent. Lucas knew Karen would lose her mind once she found out, but he wasn't afraid. He had endured enough of the HOA's nonsense, pointless regulations, condescending lectures about the greater good, and the arrogant assumption that his land was theirs to plan around. Now it was time for them to experience what it felt like to be on the receiving end, not through heated arguments, but through unmistakable, legal, and precise action. The air that evening felt thick, almost solid, like the calm before a storm. Lucas stepped out onto his porch and looked toward the long stretch of power lines draped across his land. In the moonlight, those thick cables resembled shackles, a silent declaration of ownership by people who didn't belong there. But tomorrow, he would be the one cutting them, one cable at a time. 5 a.m. The eastern sky had only just begun to glow. Across the dew-covered field, 4 figures moved silently toward the section of power lines. No talking, no laughter. Just the sound of boots pressing into firm earth, and the wind brushing against the taut electrical cables, like veins of a body being silently invaded. Lucas led the way, holding a color-printed satellite map marking each location where the HOA had illegally laid cable. His team moved like a bomb squad, deliberate, precise, no wasted motion. Eddie scanned the line with a magnetic field meter, confirming what they'd planned. This was a secondary line, no high voltage flowing through it at this hour. "First cut, clear," Eddie said with a nod. Vic stepped forward with the hydraulic cutter, slowly lining up the blade. The group held its breath. With a dry, clean snap, the first cable split, exposing its copper core to the morning air. Lucas didn't blink. It felt like he had just sliced through an invisible rope that had been tightening around his neck for weeks. They moved on to the second site, then the third. Each time the blade went through the wire, a little more of Lucas's tension released, but with every cut, the risk of being caught increased. And then, at the fourth site, everything nearly spun out of control. A silver SUV turned onto the dirt road from the main road, Karen's license plate unmistakable. The vehicle slowly approached, headlights cutting through the mist and shining directly onto the crew crouched over their tools. The group froze. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. Eddie quickly pulled the cutter behind a bush. Marty stepped back and pretended to inspect a blueprint. Only Lucas stood up straight, calmly facing the light like a man ready to confront whatever came next. Karen rolled down her window, squinting. "What's going on here?" Lucas stepped forward, his voice calm and cold as steel. "Cable maintenance. On private land. I don't want anything crossing my grandfather's soil that doesn't belong there." Karen's eyes widened. "You don't have the authority?" Lucas raised the folder in his hand without changing tone. "I do. Deed to the land, GPS photos, state law, and a full video log of this work session, should you need it in court." Karen opened her mouth to speak, but stopped. The headlights lit up a utility pole behind Lucas, a quiet reminder of what the HOA had done in secret. Karen knew. She knew she had overstepped. And more importantly, she knew there was nothing she could do about it now. Without another word, she rolled up her window, turned the car around, and drove off in silence. Lucas watched her go. He said nothing, but in his heart, it felt like the land itself had exhaled. A battle had been fought, and for the first time in years, the people of this place knew someone was willing to stand up, not with shouting, but with action that could not be denied. Just hours after Karen's silver SUV disappeared down the dirt road, rumors spread through Silver Creek estates like wildfire in a dry summer. A few residents had spotted a group of uniformed men cutting power lines, while others secretly recorded videos from afar and posted them in the neighborhood group chat under the headline, Is Lucas Bennett declaring war on the HOA? That afternoon, Karen called an emergency meeting at the HOA office. She sat at the head of the table, her face red with fury, slamming a stack of papers down in front of her. Beside her sat David Dalton, the HOA's legal advisor, who let out a long sigh as he replayed the GoPro footage that Lucas had boldly posted online, along with the caption, "Cleaning up illegal power lines on my land, clean, legal, and filmed in 4K from 3 angles." Karen jabbed a finger at the screen, seething. "He's trying to humiliate us. This is vandalism of HOA property." Dalton looked up, his tone calm to the point of condescension. "No, this is protection of private property. Under Oklahoma state law, if there is no written agreement between the HOA and the landowner, any infrastructure built on private land without permission is considered trespassing." Karen's face went pale. "But we did it for the greater good." "Karen," Dalton replied, "public benefit does not override private rights. You authorized a construction team to lay down cable without notifying him, without an agreement, without even a conversation. If Lucas countersues, he's got a real shot at winning." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. After a long pause, Joan, the oldest member of the board, spoke softly. "I think we should apologize to him." Karen turned to Joan as if she'd been stabbed in the back. That evening, Lucas received an official email from the HOA office. The subject line read, "Notice of temporary work suspension and invitation to discuss." The message was full of flowery, overly polite language, expressing a desire to clear up the misunderstanding and inviting him to a friendly discussion to restore harmony in the community. Lucas chuckled. He had seen this coming from a mile away. Posting the video had been the trap, not to stir trouble, but to turn public opinion. Now that the neighbors had seen the truth, the HOA no longer controlled the narrative like they used to. Several residents messaged him privately. "Thanks for standing up, Lucas. We're all sick of Karen too. You're the first person to literally cut the HOA's leash." And just like that, in under 24 hours, Lucas not only defended his land, but forced the HOA into a defensive position, no longer able to hide their abuse of power behind rules and fine print. Everything was just beginning, and Lucas knew it. But this time, he wasn't standing alone. Karen wasn't backing down. Having her reputation bruised was one thing, but being forced to retreat by some cowboy hat-wearing farmer? To Karen, that was unforgivable. A few days later, Lucas received a letter from the law office representing the HOA. They were officially accusing him of vandalizing community property and demanding $38,000 in damages for the severed electrical system. Lucas wasn't surprised. In fact, he had been expecting this, because he was ready. He gathered every piece of documentation, property boundary maps, HOA correspondence, footage of the unauthorized installation captured secretly by neighbors, and of course, the GoPro recordings from the day of the removal. Then he took it all to his attorney, Clara Hastings, a former county prosecutor with ice-cold eyes and a smile that had made many a courtroom opponent flinch on the witness stand. Clara silently reviewed the file for 10 minutes. When she closed it, she said only one thing. They just kicked a hornet's nest. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday, just 1 week after Lucas cut the lines. The small courtroom in Lincoln County was packed, mostly with residents from Silver Creek. Karen sat with the plaintiff's table, dressed in a deep navy suit, clutching a folder like a paper shield. On the defense side, Lucas wore a plain button-down shirt and his weathered cowboy hat. His eyes were steady, calm, unshaken. Clara opened the case with a single, devastating piece of evidence. A county-stamped plat map, clearly showing that the HOA's power lines cut through 2.6 acres of privately owned land belonging solely to Lucas. Then came the video footage, HOA contractors sneaking in at night, digging without permits, without notice, without any posted signage or landowner consent. When Karen finally stood to defend herself, her voice trembled. "We did it for the good of the community, and he destroyed the infrastructure with no warning." Clara approached the stand, placing a printed copy of Oklahoma utility law, Section 162, on the podium. No organization, individual, or group may install infrastructure on private land without a signed, written agreement, regardless of purpose. Then she looked the judge square in the eye. "Your Honor, if community good is enough reason to seize private land, how many of us will still have fences by the end of the week?" A ripple of soft laughter spread through the courtroom. Everyone except Karen. The judge didn't take long. He tapped his gavel and delivered the verdict. Lucas was not guilty. Furthermore, the HOA was ordered to pay damages for trespassing on private property, including legal fees, land restoration costs, and emotional distress. Karen lowered her head, speechless. Lucas gave a quiet smile and turned to Clara, offering her a subtle nod. He hadn't won with fists, but with patience, planning, and the law. 1 week after the trial, the land where the HOA's cables had once been buried was completely transformed. Lucas didn't just level the ground. He installed a laser-engraved wooden sign that gleamed in the sun with bold, unmistakable lettering, "Private property, HOA, keep out. The cables rest here permanently." Right beside it, he placed a long wooden bench under the shade of a tree, a spot where he now spent his afternoons sipping iced tea and watching his cattle meander across the pasture. Etched across the backrest of the bench, in smaller but no less biting words, "Sit here, where freedom begins and the HOA ends." The residents of Silver Creek began to change. Some who had once feared the HOA now breathed a little easier. They brought Lucas homemade pies, fresh coffee, and one even gifted him a brand new hat. The Liberator's hat, they joked. Every time Lucas walked through the neighborhood, at least one person gave him a thumbs up or a quiet pat on the shoulder with a whisper, "You did what the rest of us have only dreamed of for the past 10 years. And Karen? After the court defeat, her credibility unraveled fast. A community meeting was called, and for the first time in Silver Creek's history, the board moved to hold a vote to replace the HOA president. Karen stepped down quietly. No speech, no protest. She simply closed her rulebook, set it on the table, and walked away to a round of awkward, half-hearted applause. Lucas didn't run for office. He didn't need a title. All he wanted was peace. But peace on his terms, not under drone surveillance, not judged by the color of his barn, and certainly not violated by buried cables. One evening, Lucas sat on his bench beneath the sign when Eddie stopped by with 2 cold beers. "The world's split into 2 kinds of people now," Eddie said, handing Lucas a bottle. "The ones who live by HOA rules, and the ones who live like Lucas Bennett." They clinked their bottles together and laughed. In the distance, a small dirt-hauling truck passed by. The driver honked twice and waved. Lucas gave a slow nod and smiled. Not the smile of someone who had just won a fight, but the smile of a man who had taken back something that had once been stolen, his dignity, his freedom, and his right to say no. Up in the sky, the high-voltage lines still stretched across the horizon, like scars from a past conflict. But down on the ground, where the trespass had once occurred, now stood a symbol. One man, one piece of land, and a declaration that needed no loudspeakers, only a steel blade and unshakable resolve. There are moments in life when we're taught that silence is golden, that if we stay quiet, things will eventually pass. But the story of Lucas Bennett reminds us of something far more important. When your personal rights are violated, silence is no longer a virtue, it's surrender. On the surface, it may seem like just a rural man standing up to an overreaching homeowners association. But beneath that, it represents countless situations people face every day. When control crosses the line, when rules are used to mask injustice, and when "for the greater good" becomes a weapon to trample individual voices. Lucas didn't win through anger. He didn't use violence or deceit. He won through preparation, knowledge, and unwavering resolve. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He acted, deliberate, lawful, principled. It was resistance without hostility, yet powerful enough to shake a system. The lesson here isn't fight everything. It's this: know the boundaries you must never let others cross. There are things, like the land passed down by your ancestors, your personal voice, or your right to privacy, that no one can take from you unless you allow it. And if you surrender once, the violation won't stop at a buried power line. It'll creep all the way to your doorstep, and eventually into the very core of who you are. But But remember this too, you are not alone. When Lucas stood up, he didn't just defend himself. He became a symbol for others who had been silently enduring. His courage gave rise to new voices, quiet nods of agreement, and long-suppressed words of support. In the end, this story reminds us that justice doesn't always come served to us. Sometimes we have to step forward and claim it, not to destroy, but to rebuild a just order, one where rules don't override humanity and where every individual, no matter how small, has the right to be respected. Because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to cut the first wrong wire to teach an entire community how to stand. Lucas wasn't a hero. He was just an ordinary man who chose to do the right thing when everyone else stayed silent. If you believe that justice is still worth standing up for and that personal voices still matter in this world, then like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue spreading more acts of courage like the one Lucas chose. Because sometimes, you might be the next one who needs to stand up.